Biodiversity undoubtedly is fundamental to human existence because economics and quality of life for all people and the effective enjoyment of human rights depend on it. The 2019 Global Assessment Report 1 of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services revealed that about 1 million species are facing extinction. The report warned that the current biodiversity loss is increasingly putting human security and well-being at risk. Biodiversity conservation is embedded in all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals SDGs, from eliminating hunger and reducing inequalities to underpinning sustainable communities and livelihoods globally. With 10 years to achieve the SDGs, available evidence shows the lack of tangible progress and ongoing high rates of biodiversity loss. These further underline an urgent need for truly systematic change to stem the biodiversity loss for sustainability. Adoption of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity from 2011 to 2020, as well as the ICUN Promise of Sydney, adopted a number of strategies to curb decline in biodiversity worldwide. These include the Strategic Plan for Diversity 2011 to 2020, among others. According to the UN State of Nature Global Reports, 10 years after the setting up of the Aichi targets for biodiversity, the world has failed to meet a single target aimed at curbing biodiversity loss and reducing population by 2020. It therefore became imperative to draft a new strategy dubbed Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This framework, among other things, seeks to halt the loss of biodiversity by 2030 and achieve recovery and restoration. The Post-2020 framework calls on nations to build resilient communities in socio-ecological production landscapes to conserve biodiversity. This is because the framework for the conservation of biodiversity, like the SDGs, does not impose binding restricted conditions on signatory governments. Evidence to date, however, reveals that while the importance of investing in biodiversity is acknowledged by governments and multilateral institutions, action to preserve and enhance biodiversity is either insufficient or inefficient. As part of preparation towards the formulation of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the UNDP-GEF Small Grants Program, in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation and civil society organizations, have held a multi-stakeholder national dialogue on biodiversity conservation within the context of socio-ecological production landscapes in Ghana. The open-ended forum brought together experts, politicians, traditional authorities, civil society groups and stakeholders from the agriculture, forestry, fisheries and tourism sectors. The main objective of the national dialogue was to review Ghana's efforts towards post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. It was also to share a workable, sustainable framework for mainstreaming biodiversity conservation models, as well as propose institutional and financial biodiversity mainstreaming framework within the agricultural, forestry, and tourism sectors at the landscape and national levels. There were panel discussions which focused on institutional mainstreaming of biodiversity conservation in Ghana and dialogue on financial biodiversity conservation in Ghana. GBC News caught up with some stakeholders after the dialogue. The Minister of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, Dr. Kwekwe Friye, was worried about the dwindling biodiversity. He noted that the country and its neighbors are blessed with massive natural gifts. The minister called for concerted efforts between governments in the sub-region to formulate policies to curb the wanton destruction of nature.
We need to preserve our environment for a future generation, and we have to bequeath to them a restituted biodiverse, a geographic entity, because we have abused the system, we have degraded the land, we have killed off a lot of the fauna. We have to take this preservation effort very, very serious. And I was also giving some, if you like, vibes to our foreign listeners that look, they are very complicit in this, because the economic model that they have drawn is driving the destruction of the forest. This Galamsey thing, yes, is a local dimension perpetuated by public servants who sat on their jobs. But look, the market out there, the economic system that we have designed, makes gold such a very well priced commodity that they will do everything to provide the funds to drive this illegality in this country.
Head of Environment and Climate Cluster, UNDP, Mr. Paulo Dalla Stella, said his organization will continue to support efforts to help conserve biodiversity. He was of the view that biodiversity is key to sustaining livelihoods and must be conserved no matter the cost.
The proposed framework will be the key platform to further scale up actions in the developing countries in the coming years to build the resilience of communities and ecosystems. This requires reducing the intensity of development's ecological footprint in order to ensure the resilience of the biosphere with healthy and diverse ecosystems. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework require a continuous multi-stakeholder dialogue and engagement to find the best way out and make sure we stay on the path of sustainable development. For this reason, I believe that this dialogue provides a great platform for stakeholders to advance ideas on how to best integrate biodiversity conservation and climate change adaptation into the recovery of key economic sectors as a means of building back better and ensuring that the results of our actions are able to withstand future shocks.
The National Coordinator of UNDP GEF Small Grants Program, Dr. George Austin, was impressed with the quality of discussions. He hoped a policy document will improve and conserve biodiversity at the community level. He touched on the role of the UNDP and how they can facilitate development.
Yes, and in the future, we're looking for where a policy guide will be able to protect and help communities to conserve biodiversity on their farms, around their river bodies, and everywhere, not only in the protected areas. We want biodiversity conservation to be a national strategy with funding flowing from government and other sources, so that we'll be able to ensure that we utilize the resources for our own benefit as well. Yes, the UNDP is supporting the government in consultation with the relevant stakeholders so that important issues could be addressed, in the policy, instead of only a few people meeting to take a decision.
Chairman of the National Biodiversity Steering Committee is Professor Alfred Oteng-Yeboah. He expressed delight at the ideas shared during the dialogue. To him, biodiversity issues cannot be overlooked, stressing that it affects the activities of everyone. Therefore, it is essential to pay particular attention to it.
This idea of mainstreaming, you ask yourself, how do you mainstream? And the idea of mainstreaming involves helping people to understand that their actions impinge on something which is of relevance to several other people, not only them. So if you are not interested, don't think that other people are not interested. And therefore, in mainstreaming, the idea of ensuring that whatever principles are maintained in conservation, it should be seen through programs, plans, and projects that are lined up anywhere within a district, at the local level, or at the international level. Wherever you live, make sure that you are living on a landscape which is providing the life-supporting system which makes your life possible. And I think when people understand that, then it's okay.
The Chief Executive Officer and founder of Hato Foundation, Dr. Samuel Doche, lauded government and other stakeholders for their role so far in conserving biodiversity. He was worried biodiversity issues have been relegated to the background. Dr. Doche challenged political actors to show more commitment towards such issues to attract funding.
It's a fantastic thing, but what is necessary is that are we ready as a country to have the various institutional arrangements in place and ensure that we have a robust financial resource mobilization strategy, and of course a clear-cut areas of biodiversity conservation. We cannot take everything in whole, but we need to look at what is the global agenda, what is the continental agenda, what is people willing, or what are people willing to invest their money in, so that we can tweak our objective or our programs in that direction. By so doing, I don't think we'll have challenges in attracting international resources. We want to see our political or national leaders talking about biodiversity conservation as the global framework talks about living in harmony with nature. If we really wanted to see ourselves living in harmony with nature, then it is important that leaders have to be talking about it at any gathering, at any forum.
President of the National Apex Farmers Network, Dr. King David Amoah, said the dialogue has come at the right time. He said the wanton destruction of biodiversity calls for swift action to end the destruction. He noted that conservation is the way to go to rewrite the narrative.
We have destroyed a whole lot of things in our country, our forests, our water bodies, even our soils, using chemicals because of it, and then pesticides. Because of it, we don't have snails and mushroom and those things we formerly had. And if care is not taken, we'll destroy all the good species, and then a lot of things will become endangered. So this is timely, and it is good that we are having this dialogue, and not only that, the policy, this biodiversity policy that is coming out, I think we all need to give it a support so that it will be implementable. I think this dialogue has come at a very opportune time. I want the public, everybody should support what is being done. The national dialogue or biodiversity conservation is very important, because if we don't take care and we destroy all these various species that we have, we ourselves will be endangered. We'll be left with nothing. And then looking at even food nutrition and that's food security. It's very important that we conserve this, because it is the only way we can get good food to eat. Otherwise, we will be doomed. Human beings will be doomed. So I am appealing to everybody to give support to this biodiversity policy, so that we can implement it and then conserve our natural resources that we now have.
The coordinator of the National Dialogue on Biodiversity, Winfred Daniel Donko, walked us through the process after the event. Mr. Donko was impressed that a lot of people have interest in biodiversity. He said there should be more action in terms of financial commitment and sensitization, especially engaging the grassroots.
We can talk, but we need the push. And this push must be in terms of financial, education, and sensitization, which is very, very important for environmental sustainability. We have to work with the grassroots people, the chiefs, the queen mothers, the youth, farmers, landowners, who actually are engaged in the environmental issues. Women are very, very crucial in this sector because of their home management, fuel, gathering of fuel and all those things. They actually contribute a great deal to deforestation. So we think that from here, the next level is to actually look at action points where we are going to have programs and strategies to engage with communities in particular.
President of the Avatime Traditional Council in the Whole Western District, Usi Ajatekpo, said the lack of respect for values on culture and biodiversity is a central point that has led to this state of affairs. He said the law enforcement regime is weak. Therefore, if a policy framework is developed Without a dialogue sanctioning it, it will be difficult to implement. He made a strong case for the traditional authorities to be empowered to help maintain some sanity in protecting the environment.
Talking about biodiversity conservation, it should be a task and a mandate of all the chiefs to also be part of it. So we want to appeal to all of you to include the chiefs and the National House of Chiefs in this dialogue. Whatever policy framework that you are designing must be designed with the inclusion of the chieftaincy institution in mind, because they are the people, and we shouldn't also forget that we are dying, as the Bible says, for lack of knowledge. Our people die. We are dying because we don't know our environment. We take our environment for granted. We take things that surround us for granted, and of course, we take our values and traditional practices also for granted. When you look at all the developed countries, China, Japan, and all these things, they value their own cultural and traditional systems. They take very good care of them, and they don't play with them. And so because we downplay on the values that we have in society, we have problems.
A research scientist with the Center for Scientific and Industrial Research, Ghana, Dr. Caleb Ufori-Boateng, said the protection of wildlife is essential. He said all hands must get involved in biodiversity conservation, which he argued spans all facets of development.
As a research scientist, I've found a lot of species, animals and plants that can only be found in this area. Unfortunately, these animals are threatening with what scientists call extinction, meaning that the last few individuals of these species may be wiped out from the face of the planet. And I've been working with the communities to see how we will be able to conserve these species by establishing protected areas and building the capacity of the local people. One important outcome of this campaign has been to establish a canopy walkway that is aimed at raising revenue to be able to support the project, but also to support the local communities who have donated land to the conservation of wildlife. At the national scale, it is my hope that all stakeholders will get involved in biodiversity conservation. I'm expecting that businesses, companies, banks, corporations, media, district assemblies will all actively get involved in biodiversity conservation by developing and acting on strategies that benefit biodiversity. The reason is that at the end, biodiversity is our source of water, is our source of food, is basically the reason that we exist. And so I believe that all people ought to get involved and take it more seriously.
A director at the Environment Division at the Ministry of Environment, Peter Justice, spoke about the functions of the committee and policies that are geared towards conserving biodiversity.
The ministry over the years has developed a number of policy documents known as the NBSAP, National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, which it has been implementing. The ministry has also implemented a number of projects, together with its implementing agencies like the EPA. For example, we have the GEMP project. We have had the Sustainable Land and Water Management Project, the Adaptation Fund project, Man and Biosphere. All these projects are aimed in one way or the other at conserving biological resources. So there are projects and programs that are running. We also have projects and programs running in other ministries and other agencies like the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources Forestry Commission, Ministry of Agric, and so on and so forth, which we also participate at the level of the steering committee of these projects, where we make policy inputs into how these projects are implemented. That's one way of also ensuring that the Convention on Biological Diversity is implemented in Ghana. However, we realize that we have not developed a specific policy for biodiversity over the years. So this time around, we are developing a national biodiversity policy, not an NBSAP, that will provide ourselves as a broad framework on biodiversity issues, and it will touch on all the mandates of the different institutions. So it's a kind of harmonization of what we are doing and making sure that we put this into one single document that can serve as a reference point for all institutions and stakeholders. So this document is currently being developed, and we've had some consultations with state actors. We want to move beyond the state actors to consult with the civil society organizations and also private sector to make sure that we enhance the document and make it more inclusive and participatory.
An expert in biodiversity and environmental issues, Dr. George Owusu Isegbe, addressed the need to come out with accurate data at all levels. He said information gathering and its dissemination at all levels is of prime essence.
We all can agree that it has not been that well. And even just thinking of what is happening with our water bodies, just thinking of what is happening in our oceans, where our fishermen would go to sea and come back with their nets full of plastics, just thinking of going into our rivers and it's all polluted, it's all mud, it's all not just muddy, but actually poisoned. Just thinking of that and the continuous decrease of fish catches, whether in river bodies or in marine ecosystems, we can understand that we need to do something, and urgently so. And in fact, the global biodiversity framework post-2020 requires all governments to do that.
The post-2020 global biodiversity framework is embedded with very laudable objectives towards the restoration of lost biodiversity. The need for a policy document and framework is a prerequisite to rewrite the narrative. But a lot has to be done across board to sanitize the environment to protect it for posterity.